we think we know what other people are thinking about us.
I'm assuming that because Abby has a scowl on her face, she is like hates me or something. Not that you have a scowl on your face, but like that's an example.
I got scared.
I walk by some guy in the street and he has this frown on his face, and I automatically think, oh, he must be thinking that I'm the worst person ever.
Yeah.
When in reality,
it's like, no.
Maybe his dog died. You know, who knows?
Right. Someone peed in his cereal.
Right. Somebody. Does that happen
What?
to you?
Welcome back to the Journey Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler.
I'm Dillon.
I'm Abigail.
Today we're talking about how to not care what other people think, or should we care a little bit about what other people think? I think Abigail's got some good things to say about that.
Your life, your journey starts now.
I'm somebody who, especially when I was a kid, but even still today, cared very deeply what other people think about me. So much so that when I was in middle school, I was really caught up in the neon color Nike fad that particularly that middle school boys that play sports seem to think that the brighter your clothes are and the more Nike logos you see, the cooler you are. And so I probably bankrupted my parents when I was in sixth grade because the only things I would wear were neon colored Nike clothing. And then when you're an adult and you see middle schoolers still wearing that, you look at it and you're like, that is ugly.
That is so ugly.
Yeah, why?
I thought that was ugly in middle school.
Well, you must have been cooler than me because I was really bought into the had to be Nike, had to be neon, and you could wear any different neon that you wanted to, but the more you had on, the cooler you were. And so it was like I only would wear those types of clothes because I wanted to look like everybody else. I wanted to fit in.
You really cared what other people thought about you.
Right. And so if you didn't wear Nike, then people thought like, oh, their family must be poor or their parents must not love them or something. And our family was kind of poor. My parents did love me, but we didn't have that much money. And so it was like if you wanted to look like you were with the in crowd, who, at least where I'm from, tended to have a little bit more money, you had to wear Nike.
Yeah.
And the brighter you were, the more you stood out, then, I don't know, the more...
Everyone just looked like a highlighter.
Yeah, honestly. And we thought that was cool. It was like, especially if you were an athlete. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dillon was a skater boy.
Mine was you have to wear the most muted colors, grays and blacks and like dark. Yeah. So I wore the same in 7th grade. I swear I wore the same exact Vans sweatshirt for the entire year.
Yeah.
So we have someone who's super dark and then super bright.
And the same jeans throughout the entire year.
Right.
And
was it because you cared what other people thought, or you just liked those clothes?
Both. Okay. I think it was like I felt comfortable, but also it was like I felt comfortable because I thought that's what other people wanted me to wear.
Yep.
Because my friends wore it, that type of thing. It's the same idea as you.
Right.
So there's 2 points that I like to touch on. So going back, you said something about how you wanted to be perceived as your parents, or you had money.
Yep.
And that they loved you. So would you like to touch more on that?
Well, I mean, my parents did love me. We just didn't have a lot of money. And there was something about for whatever reason, and maybe this is true in a lot of places, but there was like a correlation in our school between kids that came from money and their level of popularity. And so like if you wanted to be in the popular group, you had to appear like you came from a family with money. That was just kind of, and I don't know that when we were 12, we probably weren't thinking that consciously, but that's just how it was.
So do you think it was perception, or it just was, that's just the way that it was?
I mean, I tend to think all of middle school popularity is just perception, because really it's like, you think when you are at that stage of life, and maybe this is true everywhere, not just middle school, but you think that little circle that you're in, like your little life bubble that is middle school or high school, or maybe like your workplace as an adult, you think that everything that takes place there matters a lot, and so you put a lot of emotional stock into, man, do the people here like me? Do the people here want to be around me? Do the people here think highly of me? And so, I guess that is still, I mean, it was more perception than reality, but I was really caught up in what people perceived. And honestly, sometimes I still find myself doing it today. Like, I will work way more than I should. Like I will work well over 40 hours in a week.
Okay.
One, because I like being productive, but also because if I'm being truly honest, deep down, there's a part of me that's like, I need people to think of me as productive and as like somebody who works hard and has a high output and is high achieving. And so part of me, without even realizing it, I will overwork myself because I want people to look at me and go, man, he works really hard.
And where do you think that comes from?
I mean, there's a good
therapist.
It's a good question. Yeah, right. Yeah, I thought you were supposed to be the therapist here. Yeah,
she's got the therapist.
To be honest, I think
episode.
All of us, to some degree, put stock in what other people think of us, because I mean, you certainly don't want your entire self-perception to be only yourself. Like if everything I think about myself only comes from me, then I could easily lie to myself. I could easily just make myself think I'm way better than I actually am, or I could make myself think I'm way worse than I actually am. And I think the pride and self-deprecation are kind of like two sides to the same coin, and that is self-centeredness. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but I think sometimes we unintentionally get so fixated on what we think of ourselves that we forget that like the world doesn't revolve around us. Not even in a way always that's selfish, just like if we get really caught up in our own thoughts and then we're kind of stuck in this like vicious cycle of I either think really highly of myself and so I'm going to be prideful, or I think really lowly of myself and so no matter, you could give me all the compliments in the world and I'm still going to think I'm terrible because I'm so caught up in what I think of me. And so I do think there's, to some degree, it is healthy to have some of your self-identity come from things outside of you. Certainly we don't want to be so self-focused that we are just like only dictating our, what we think of ourselves, because it's really easy to lie to yourself, both positively and negatively. I think you have some really good thoughts on where's the line between not being too self-focused when it comes to, what we think of ourselves, but also not caring so much about what other people think that controls our whole life. So how do you draw that line? Are you 17, 18?
Yeah, 17.
How does 17-year-old Abigail find herself not being pulled too far in either direction of being self-centered, but also not caring so much about the approval of others that's all you live for?
Yeah. Okay. So the way I would determine first I'd like to say I do think it is important that we care about what other people think of us, because we're humans and we live in community and we are social creatures. And so a normal working brain has an empathetic nature. And so
like if I tell Dillon that he smells, he should listen to that and like take a shower.
Probably, because he wants to be around his friends and they want to, enjoy his presence.
I deoed up this morning. It's
Good.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I do is I first want to determine, I don't want to care so much that I start lying about who I am, that I start being dishonest and unauthentic, because, people are going to find out. And also, why would you want to live that way?
Wear neon clothes that you don't actually want to wear.
Yeah, right. I'm so glad I didn't have to wear neon clothes. That is ugly.
I didn't hate them at the time, but looking back, I'm like, man, what was I thinking? Well, I think, Dillon, you brought this up earlier, but I think there's something to be said about understanding the difference between what do people actually think about me, what have they communicated that they think about me, as opposed to what am I assuming they think about me. Like what's the difference between my perception of their perception and what they actually think?
The power that we give to people is totally dependent on us. Are their thoughts or the things that they say about us, are they going to affect us?
Right.
That is ultimately, that's up to me.
Right.
Because Tyler, you can say something that might spark a thought, spark an emotion, but I decide how I'm going to respond or react.
Right.
You don't make me do anything.
Yeah, true.
I choose my own behaviors. You might have influenced me a little bit, and I might have, felt a certain way because you said something to me.
Right.
But ultimately, it's up to me to behave the way that I'm going to behave.
Yeah.
So it's the power we give to other people is solely dependent on us.
Right.
Like as a counselor, I really liked the question asking thing that you brought up, Abby, because I think it's really important to ask questions to find what our reality truly is. There's one skill that I really like. It's called check the facts. It's 3 questions. It's one, first you have to determine I'm feeling an emotion. What emotion is it? First question is what event triggered my emotion? And the second question is, what assumptions and interpretations am I making about the event? So you said something to me, or you did something that I interpreted a certain way.
Right.
I have an emotion that comes up because of that.
Right.
The third question is my emotion rooted in what actually happened, or is it rooted in my assumptions, interpretations of what happened?
Yeah, right.
Because sometimes I'm misinterpreting it. And so when you get into like psychology, they define it as like cognitive distortions, which is a fancy way to say my thoughts might not be as clear as I might think they are.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, Tyler, you wear contacts, right?
I do.
If you take those contacts out, what happens to your vision?
It's blurry.
It becomes blurry.
Right.
It becomes distorted. You might see like truth, like you might see shapes and colors and light, but you're not seeing like the finest details, and you're not seeing everything. So you might interpret, you might see things a certain way. You see part of it, but you're not seeing all of it.
Yeah.
So a cognitive distortion, really good example of this for like this topic is mind reading. Like
we think we know what other people are thinking about us.
I'm assuming that because Abby has a scowl on her face, she is like hates me or something. Not that you have a scowl on your face, but like that's an example.
I got scared.
I walk by some guy in the street and he has this frown on his face, and I automatically think, oh, he must be thinking that I'm the worst person ever.
Yeah.
When in reality,
it's like, no.
Maybe his dog died. You know, who knows?
Right. Someone peed in his cereal.
Right. Somebody. Does that happen
What?
to you?
I don't know, but that's like
that is so random.
That's a thing people say. Like if someone's mad, they're like, "Man, who peed in your Cheerios?" You know?
Yeah, who pooped in your cornflakes?
No, you know,
that's disgusting.
Going on perception, I just remembered a story. In sixth, I have pin straight hair, like pin straight hair. When I was in middle school, I used to straighten my hair every day because all my friends would straighten their hair. Sure, and so I was like, oh, I need to straighten my hair too. Girl, you did not need to straighten your hair.
Your hair's already straight.
And it's like I ruined my hair because of it. And so I'm thinking of like perception. Like I literally, that has to be delusional, bro.
Well, and I think we have.
Delulu.
Dillon, don't try and use slang. You're old. I think
that's cringe. We should get a button.
My goal is to
that's
get
cringe.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. My goal is to get you to say cringe at least one time per episode.
Yeah, fair.
That's like my hidden goal.
That's actually a really good point. Well, if you took our text thread from last night and this morning, you'd have the next like 4 or 5 episodes covered. But honestly, I think the one thing is we have with that like invisible audience idea is we have such an overinflated sense of what people think of us, so like how important we are in other people's lives.
What's the invisible audience? Because we didn't define that.
Okay. Well, you define the invisible audience, then we'll come back to what I was going to say.
Well, I think simply put, it's we walk into a room and we just perceive that everyone's looking at us. Right. We're the center of everyone's attention.
Right. We tend to view life as if we're the center of the universe. Not even consciously usually. That's just like we think about ourselves more than other people generally. And so like you mess up, right? Like you trip over your own feet when you're in middle school and you stumble. You think that everybody in the room saw it, when in reality, probably no one saw it. And even the ones who did thought about it for 1 second, and then their brain went back to something different. Like we just have an overinflated sense of how important we are in other people's lives. And I think that leads to us caring a lot about what we think other people think, when in reality, they're not thinking about us nearly as much as we assume.
Yeah. Like there's a saying I have where it's like no one cares more than you do.
Yeah, right.
That's
they
good.
Literally don't.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That goes back to the cognitive distortion thing I was talking about. The minimization and magnification is a big one too. We tend to like minimize maybe the positive things about ourselves.
True.
And we maximize like the negative things.
True.
So I trip and I think, oh, everybody's looking at me. Everybody thinks I'm a klutz and I'm just embarrassing.
Right.
Whereas I might get a good grade or do something else and it's like, well, nobody cares.
Yeah.
But it's, and I think actually sometimes when we struggle with like ego being narcissistic,
it can looking be too much at ourselves.
It can be a kind of flip. It's I maximize all of the good things about myself and I minimize all the things about other people.
Yeah, true. Yeah, well, and I think there's something natural about finding some of our identity and what other people think and say. Like, it's not all bad. Abby, you brought up earlier, we are social creatures. I mean, there's nothing wrong with us trying to understand each other. And, like, I do care what Dillon thinks about me in a healthy sense, partially because Dillon and I have a close relationship. And so I give more value to what the people who are close to me think of me than the people who are not close to me. But part of that comes with having to actually find real, authentic friendships as opposed to just, everybody in your school. Like that big, broad range of people is not a good measurement for your self-worth or your self-identity, because ultimately you can't please everybody. Like, not everyone's going to like you, and that's okay. And the reality is, if at the deepest level of who I am, I find my identity in the God who made me instead of in other people, then I can actually evaluate other people's opinions of me in a way that's healthy, in a way that's in line with reality. Because if my identity is only determined by Dillon and Abigail and everybody else in my life, then it's going to constantly be changing up and down, because even what Abigail thinks of me is constantly changing. Like we when we knew each other for a day, what you thought of me is different than what you think of me now, right? Like back then you probably met me, you're like, man, this guy's a youth pastor and he's probably like really put together and stuff.
He's a weirdo.
Yeah, now
that's
you.
What I thought.
Oh yeah. Well, I thought you'd say that more now. Now that you got to know me, you're like, man, this guy's a whack job.
Still a whack job.
Yeah, right. But like, if my perception of myself is rooted in stuff that's always changing, other people's opinions and feelings that are always changing, then who I am, how I think of myself is going to be constantly up and down. But if as people who believe that we actually are created by a God on purpose, like the way that you are is not an accident, that God wanted you the way that you are, and God wanted you the way that you are, and he wanted me the way that I am, then if that's at my most like internal level, if that's where my identity comes from, then all the rest of it, I actually have the freedom to evaluate and say, okay, what about other people's perception of me should I care about? And what about other people's perception of me can I kind of leave behind? And there's this, we've talked about Proverbs on this show before. It's a good, it's like right in the middle of the Bible, and there's a lot of wisdom to it, and they're like really nice one-liners, so they're easy to kind of remember. And in the 29th chapter of Proverbs, one of the verses, verse 25 says, "Fearing people is a dangerous trap, but trusting the Lord means safety." So it's like if you are fearing what other people think of you, it's kind of a trap. Like, it's never going to really lead you to the place that you want to be. If you're just thinking about what God thinks about you, he loves you and he cares for you and he created you with intention and purpose. And so that can allow you to live into who you're created to be. And I've seen a pastor use this illustration before. The word in Hebrew for trap is actually like the kind of snare that they would use for, like, if they trapped an animal and they wanted to be able to like force the animal to come with them, they would take these little hooks and like put it in their nose. And so when you pull on it, the animal has to follow you if they don't want their nose to hurt, right? And it's kind of gross to think about, but he uses this illustration. I'm going to do it.
I would be motivated by that too.
It's going to look really gross when I do this, so I promise I'll wash my hands.
The first time we have cameras,
right?
We're doing
first
this,
time we have cameras, I'm going to put my fingers in my nose.
This is our first reel right here.
Right, but honestly, it's like, oh, like I
I could have imagined that. Like, I didn't need the visual.
On social media, like what Dillon thinks of me, what Abigail thinks of me. It's like pulling you by the inside of your nose with spikes. Like, everybody else's opinions of you is constantly tearing you in different directions.
Yeah.
So, and I will wash my hands after this.
That's really interesting. Like,
yikes.
That's an interesting insight.
Gross. Thanks, Abigail. Do you still think I'm a whack job?
No.
More so now than you did before this episode?
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think if the center of who I am is determined by the God who made me, then I can step out into the rest of the world with an appropriate appreciation, like Abigail brought up, of what other people think of me. I can care about the things I should care about. I can leave aside the things that don't really matter, especially if someone's just trying to be hurtful or whatever. And I can really live into my self-identity that's determined by a healthy balance of God, others, and me, and not just one of those, being, especially not just others being the thing that determines who I am. So what would the two of you say, just from a solution standpoint, if I'm somebody who finds myself caught up in constantly caring too much about what other people think of me, what do I do? What can I do today to make a positive change in my life.
Do you want me to answer first?
Please.
I'd say first, find the group of people or the groups of people that you should care about their opinions. You don't need to care about everyone's. You're not going to be able to. That's impossible. And then watch closely and ask questions.
Do people have your best interest in mind? If they do, I mean, those are the type of people you want to spend your time with. If they don't, you'll find out pretty soon that that's not worth it. Maybe.
Right. When you find the people who have your best interest in mind, those are also the people who will balance out the good and the bad. Like if someone's constantly just telling you about all the things that are wrong with you, they probably don't have your best interest at heart. But also if they're only ever telling you the things that are right with you, they might also not have your best interest at heart. Like when you can really find people to connect with, right? Maybe someone to go through the journey resources with, to just be honest with you in a way that's loving and that wants the best for you. I think then you have the freedom to say, I don't need everybody else to think well of me because I know that this person does, or I know that this small group of people, and that I can think well of myself in a way that's measured and honest. I don't think I'm the best person in the world, but I don't think I'm the worst person in the world either. And that's a healthy middle. I can move through life saying, it's not that big of a deal if everybody else straightens their hair and I don't. Like, you know, if they really are my friends, they won't care if my hair is straight or not. And your hair is just straight anyways. But like, you know, they won't care if I wear neon clothes or not, or they won't care how much money my parents have, or they won't care if I'm in this sport or in that activity, because they just care about me as a person, not, you know, some weird messed up perception of how popular I am.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next time and make sure you like and subscribe. Visit us at journeycoaching.org. and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Start your own journey at journeycoaching.org.
Your life, your journey starts now.